terrifying. So S-4 is the voice where we discuss these things in detail. You can find S-4 right here on Night Dreams Talk Radio. And for our local listeners, also on KSVU 90.1 FM from 10 to 12 p.m. Saturdays with our pre-recorded shows. So tonight, it's January 19th. We're excited to discuss Project Blue Book, the historical perspective along with the TV show. Is it really factual? Also, some information has come up to the public about MUFON. Is this a distraction, or is something really going on? So tonight we have Cole Wade-Leitner, our FMP Lore and Culture Research Specialist and owner of Statement of Sound DJ Services, Chris Dodge, our Extended Care Specialist in FMP, Dave Scott, Spaced Out Radio, our Keith Andrews, our Alien Race Specialist in FMP, and Michael Hall, our Paranormal Lawyer and founder of UFO I-Team. So how are we doing tonight, guys?
Just wonderful.
Greetings
Excellent.
and salutations.
Excellent. You know, I got to say, I don't have the History Channel, but they actually put the first episode on the History Channel's YouTube channel, so I was able to watch it. And then, of course, the second episode they didn't put on the YouTube channel, but you can always find it on the History Channel's website, Flatwoods Monster. Now, that one always intrigued me. What do you guys think of the show?
It was awesome. There's no other way to put that.
You know, there ain't. I don't want to be a spoiler tonight, but it's going to wind up being a spoiler. You just got to watch it regardless. I kind of put it in, you know, I got some questions for the panel tonight because I'm curious. Who is the mystery woman and the mystery guy that they really haven't introduced yet? I have a theory. I think they're Russian spies wanting to see what Blue Book's doing. You know, that Project Blue Book was out in the 1940s, 50s, and it was the era of the nuclear bomb, which is a reason the government wanted to keep UFOs so secret, because they didn't want this big UFO flap, which they knew there was something to it, but they had to keep it quiet. So do you think those two are Russian spies?
Yes.
Looking at this from someone...
Go ahead. And actually, well, in the dramatic production that they put together, they're speaking Russian. Let's put it that way. So the implication is that these are Russian spies, which is kind of fascinating that they would throw that in to the mix in this production. By the way, if anybody has not seen this thing, if we can help describe to some of our listeners what this Project Blue Book is all about, it's just fascinating that they're putting so much time and money and heavyweight actors into this production about the U.S. Air Force's secret project back then. No one knew about it, from 1952 to 1969. Where the Air Force, along with this Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an actual astrophysicist, astronomer, and they were trying to basically debunk initially these reports that were happening all over the country during that period of time because they thought it was a distraction, basically, for the Air Force have to deal with these kinds of things. So, but the production value, the scenes, the sets, the costumes, everything is the 1950s. It's really well done.
You know, Cole and I were talking about this earlier because if you look at the historical side of Dr. Hynek, he seemed a lot more skeptical in the historical reviews when he first came on board than that show is kind of portraying.
Seemed to get sucked in right at the first episode.
He did.
As soon as they visited that first site.
But at the same time, and we discussed this today, I know, but at the same time, you can't portray personality in documents. So I think they're trying to portray that side of the scientist when he was sucked into the Project Blue Book, he thought he was going in as a scientist, and if there was nothing to disprove, it's not swamp gas. That airplane definitely didn't hit a weather balloon, but there was radiation and there was damage to the wing. So as a scientist, you're going to look at that and go, that wasn't a weather balloon. We crashed. We crashed an airplane. We duplicated what the experiencers saw and did, and we crashed the plane, but he didn't. So as a scientist, that's crazy. So there's something else going on, and then you got the captain going, nope, it's a weather balloon. Already turned in the report.
Yeah. Well, the history behind Dr. Hynek is that there was no indication that he was the crusader for the truth up until the time of the Michigan swamp gas event. And you hit the nail on the head there, Coop, when you said that, because I don't know if you remember what happened back then. Of course, the baby boomers would, us older folks. But in Michigan, there was this group of sightings that really hit the newspaper big time, and they needed to get something resolved because it was happening so often up there. And that just happened to be congressional member Gerald Ford's jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So he called for a massive investigation of what's going on. Of course, then the Air Force sent Dr. Hynek up to that area to investigate. And what Dr. Hynek comes out and says after his few days there, whatever, talking with the authorities and all that kind of thing, was that it's very possible this was swamp gas that everybody saw. And what happened was that moment right there was a turning point in really the history of our country, where finally the witnesses had been fed up and had enough of all of these debunking explanations of what they are seeing all over the country. It wasn't just Michigan, but Michigan was kind of like the tipping point, mm-hmm. where it blew back big time for the Air Force. Even the local law enforcement, who, of course, live in that area and were responding to these reports, were seeing the same things that their witnesses were. And the Air Force and Dr. Hynek at that point were basically saying that everyone was misidentifying swamp gas. And, of course, at that point, all of a sudden the blowback happened, big PR problem for the military at that point. And that is supposedly the tipping point for Dr. Hynek, where he started to realize, oh, my God, the lid, we can't get the lid on this thing very long, and I am losing my credibility big time if I don't really get down to the bottom of this. So that happened, late. I think it was in the 60s, actually, that happened. So mm-hmm. It'd been quite a while before they started this program, and he was just doing what he was asked to do up to that point.
And Goof on Radio is bringing up a good point. The Russians didn't need to watch his wife unless they thought that was a way to get into the house, to see the office, to kind of see what kind of information she was learning from her husband. That'd be the only thing I could think of. Now, Chris.
Well, no, pillow talk.
Well, yes. And that's possible too. She had a crush on her, I think.
Well, no, but I mean, between the husband and the wife, if he mentions anything to her, who better to confide in than her best friend?
Well, I can also tell you, we being in the cavalry right along the checkpoint Charlie, I can't talk tonight, in Germany, we had to take SAIDA courses, and it's subversion and espionage against the U.S. government. And it was a known fact that the Russians used women as spies all the time to gain information, to gain trust, but usually from male soldiers, not from the females. So they could use them either or, but primarily they did use them. The females were focused on the men. Now, real quick, I want to bring Chris in because Chris has been on the team for about a year now, and has been learning about the UFO side and whatnot. I want to get your take on Blue Book. What have you learned?
It's very, when I was watching it, it was almost like my jaw was dropping. You hear things like you're correct. The rest of the panel is so much more experienced in this than I am. And, you've heard things, you've heard of all this cover-up. But I think the thing that got me is, I could understand just by hearsay, people calling in, I saw this, I hear this, and you think, okay, the government's like, yeah. Well, that wasn't a UFO, and I figured, maybe they'd, drop it like that. I did not realize the amount of paperwork and the effort that the government has taken to cover this up. It is absolutely jaw-dropping to me to watch the effort that they've taken to do this. And it drives me nuts to have to wait 6 days to see the next episode.
Well, the next episode, going by the previews, is really going to be a turning point. Because, the next episode just looks completely crazy compared to, we know that they did dogfights with Foo Fighters in Craft in the Sky back then. That wasn't a surprising case. Flatwoods Monster, and some people will get offended, but I can actually see Concrete reacting the way they did in the Flatwoods episode. Completely. Let's go find this creature. Let's go blow it up. Oh, there is no creature. She made it up. Oh, let's go after her now. I can see Concrete exactly. Because, you know as well as I do, Michael, back in the 1900s with the Orson Welles incident, when the power went out in Concrete, right after they heard this Orson Welles newscast come on, and everybody grabbed their guns because they really thought there was an alien invasion going on because the power went off the whole community right as they were starting the news broadcast.
Oh, man, I tell you what, I'm glad you mentioned that, Eric, because this is a great analogy of what you're talking about here. Because if people don't know the story of how Concrete, Washington, the small little community of Concrete, basically was the tipping point that put the entire United States into a panic mode in 1930 when Orson Welles did his War of the Worlds broadcast. I need to get people up to speed on this fascinating local slant to the story. And I don't want to interrupt your thought pattern, but I thought this would be a good place to bring people up to speed on what's going on in your local neck of the woods there from where you are there, Coop. In 1930, Orson Welles was 24 years old. Can you imagine this? And this guy was already had been a Broadway genius director. He was very famous for taking historical novels and turning them into stage plays. Of course, on radio, that was a perfect fit. So he was doing this on radio. And, of course, back in those days, radio was it. There was no television. This was everybody in the United States sitting around their big, giant console radios after dinner, the whole family, by the way, and listening to all the wonderful radio shows coming live from some ballroom at the top of the Astoria Hotel in New York City or wherever it was.
And real quick, Michael, to add to that, you got to understand back in the 1930s, that was a family event. The whole family, the kids included, would gather around the radio. Think of the fireside chats.
Yes. And matter of fact, just before the kids got to bed, they got actually after dinner to sit around maybe an hour or so with the family and enjoy those things. And here's what was the biggest hit going back then. It was Charlie McCarthy. The comedy shows were king back then. And Edgar Bergen, the famous ventriloquist, had his character Charlie McCarthy, and they would have a wonderful show for about an hour or so at about 8 o'clock. But here's the genius of